So in today's video, I want to talk about my personal story with ADHD and HSP, or in general like neurodiversity, and how over the course of my life I shifted from seeing it as a disability and now kind of discovering how it is a superpower, and also how that has to do with a pathless path. But I will come to that in the end, so bear with me. Because now I want to start like a autobiographical, it's a hard word, story, like starting in a childhood, going all the way to young adult until now. And you can see here, in a way, they are very similar, right? And for me, it's really like a hero's journey where you start somewhere and then you have the whole journey of the hero, right? And then obviously there is many obstacles on the way or things he goes through. But then in a way, he comes back to where he came from, but what changed is he himself, right? And I want to take this story around the two kind of seeming opposites of the conditioning and the true self. And true self you often hear in the pathless path or the non-dual. And like I said, I will talk about that later. But for now, just to keep it simple, the conditioning is basically all the things we have been conditioned to as when we were young, and that kind of put layers on top of what we are in our core, right? What is our true self, and what is even something that is beyond the body mind. And in this state, it is like a childlike state where wonder and curiosity and play, they come back to the surface, right? And that's why I want to talk about this. Because as a kid, I often did feel like a misfit. And in these moments, I felt a lot of suffering. And that would reoccur throughout my life. But as a kid, I think that the difference was I was not aware. My system could not kind of go on the meta level to make sense of that, right? So it was more like a very physical experience. And also I had like strong dermatitis, it's a skin disease where when I would move my hands, they would crack and bleed, and I could not, like, there's a picture of me as a kid where it's just, I think on the beach or something, I'm just crying because, yeah, I was hurting, my body was hurting. And then on the other end of the spectrum, like that was like the suffering part. And then on the other side of the spectrum, if you want, I remember this scene where I was like, I think it was the Natural Museum of History, like the whole evolution about nature and all these things. And there was this box where they put an egg in there. And I think they said like it might, the chicken might come out any moment. And so as a kid, I was just like standing in front of this thing and just waiting, like seeing the little cracks and like I was so in the moment and I didn't care. I think I stood there like 3 hours or something, and all the other kids were gone, and I was just like hyper focused. And in a way you could say like already then, like that was like really showing this ADHD trait of the hyper focus and forgetting time, right? And like over the time, I also discovered, and I want to expand on that on future videos. But for now, like I started to see that ADHD is not so much like a dysfunction, but it's more like a way how your brain works. And often it comes also as a coping mechanism. And for example, Gabor Mate talks about that, like also the epigenetics play in there. That's why it is passed on by generations, because and that's why, in a way, this is like my story, but also this can be seen as like a general story, because when in the Second World War, obviously there was a lot of traumatic experiences. Like my grandfather was under like the ruins of a house in the war, like for 3 days, or another grandfather, he would like have to walk back from Russia all the way here in the winter. And so there was a tremendous amount of suffering and like trauma, and it was just like stored in the bodies. And back then people would not work through the conditioning or discover the true self, so it would just be stored in the system. Now we know in science that over 7 generations this is passed on. So it's not just my story, but it's really like, I feel like it's a generational story, and it's also something that is much more general, I think. So coming back to this here, these things that were passed on, or traumas in the childhood, I think they can enhance these traits. Another thing is, as a kid, I always sensed, right? Like when there were tensions or things were not right, I intuitively sensed it, but then adults would tell me like, no, like that's not true, or what you feel is not correct. And so I also like put that, like my grandfather would put his trauma, right, of being in the ruins, and then it would come out like in moments and he could not control. I think I took these things that happened in me, and then one thing was my body, like this dermatitis thing. But another thing that I talked about in the last video, like these outbursts of anger, right? Because when you suppress an emotion, it's not gone, but it's just like pushed down, and then in there it kind of develops its own dynamic and it grows into a shadow, right? It's also something I want to talk more about in future videos, but for now, coming back to this, as a kid I had both the shadow and the curiosity, right? Like if you want like a pendulum, or like two polar opposites, right, already playing out. But I was lacking the bird's eye view, so I was just sometimes like all covered up in this. And then so when it continued, I developed like coping strategies, right? And in a way, that made me functional, but also that because of that, I felt alienated, or I felt like a misfit again. This was getting even stronger. But then fortunately I had sports and art that was like for me a channel or vehicle to transform these or transmute them, like to turn them into something creative. But still, I was not really seeing the root of it, right? And so I would end up like both exploring what I was curious about. Like I would study dance and art or sculptures, and I thought like, this is gonna be my vocation, my calling. But because I had all these shadows that I were not aware of, like at the same time I was exploring them, the suffering would also grow, right? And I came all the way to a point as an adult where the suffering became so apparent that I slipped into these kind of depressive phases where I almost like there were points where I was like, what is the whole point, to continue if this is not getting better? And seeing most people around me also not, like, I didn't see them as like being this fulfilled human being, right? Like basically like children often seem to be. They're just playing and they're just exploring, and most adults, they are not, right? They are more in the hamster wheel, and they are the rat race, and and it just tried to make ends meet. And I was like, yeah, what's the point? But I also couldn't kind of figure out a way how to make my like these artistic sides, how to make them work. And I noticed like the constraint when I tried to monetize it, right? So I was like, I couldn't find a way, excuse me, how to bring them together, right? Like how, where is the freedom? Where is the way? How can I both enjoy and have abundance? And I couldn't find that way. And I think there was a point where the suffering was so, I couldn't bear it anymore, that I came across this non-dual path, right? And especially one teaching where it's all about like, instead of removing your suffering, like you're exploring the truth, right? And that's, for me, like the conditioning that causes the suffering is versus the truth, where there is this childlike wonder. So I started this path really 6 months ago. I mean, already 10 years ago, I did like an awakening coaching, and I think it already sparked something, but I think I was not ready that my system would understand it on a deeper level. So just like intellectually would touch me, but not go deeper. And I think it really changed for me when I also started exploring my senses, right? And started really exploring like, okay, what's the fabric of my mind, right? And noticing that the very fabric of my mind is completely free, right? It's completely curious. It's completely, creative, and it's not restricted by my body or my mind. And that's the journey I'm on right now. Like you could call it the adventure mode. And so really, I feel like I want to explore like these different stages or these phenomena we humans go through under that lens. And also, as a little spoiler, also, that's why I think we humans have a core difference to like AI, where AI can be very smart and intelligent, and it can collect data, but what we have is awareness, right? And that's something we share with all beings, and that's what makes us alive. And I challenge that this can never be replicated by a machine. So I feel that's why we now, in this age we live in, we're kind of forced to really look within and to really see what is our humanness, right? And instead of just doing kind of mindless or machine-like tasks. Since the Industrial Revolution, right, that was like tasks that machines can do much better. And even still today, I think many people do tasks that machines actually could do better. But now, like, that forces us to discover that side of us that is curious, that is like what makes us really human, right? It's the emotions and it's all these things. So I think we live in an exciting time, and that's what really I want to talk about more in future videos. So to sum it up, why this is disability to superpower is because I think the exact traits that caused me the suffering, or like really where I couldn't bear it anymore, were the traits of the ADHD and the HSP, because the ADHD really can dive deep, right? And it's not, or the ADHD brain wants to dive deep, wants to really understand, and is not content with like just doing what everybody does, right? Like also the bird's eye view, and this is all very important in the pathless path. And the same as the HSP, like, because at least for me, I think what was very important is that the senses, the more sensitive you are, the more nuanced you can, and this is something probably you can learn also, but it's easier probably when your senses are so open and so fine that you can really sense like, okay, what is going on? Like, what is inside me? What is outside me? Is this really, what is really going on, right? Like maybe I feel like you question more. And this, again, like probably everybody can experience that, but I think it's more, maybe one is more drawn to that when one feels something is not right, and then you question more, at least in my case. But yeah, I think that's what I can see, how this ultimately, the disability and the suffering ultimately led me here, and now being this place where it is really an adventure. So yeah, I'm very grateful for the seeming bad things, but now I can see how they open my eyes. And so yeah, if you like that, if you found it insightful, you can leave me a comment also what topics you would like to see. And yeah, if you want to see more about that, you can consider subscribing. And yeah, see you in the next video.